Hi everyone, welcome to the Digital Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Pranav. Pranav, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Tom. Absolutely. My name is Pranav Bhardwaj. I'm a senior manager at the Deloitte Toronto office in Canada. I belong to the supply chain and network operations group that is slotted under the management consulting practice. I'm also the leader for AI and logistics here in Deloitte, with part of my responsibility centered towards developing AI-based technologies that might change the supply chain landscape. Gen AI obviously is the most recent and perhaps the biggest after the advent of the internet. So that's something that I'm focusing on as well. And I have over a decade of experience in management consulting with my clients spread across the globe. I've been lucky to have worked in a plethora of industries from aviation and aerospace to retail and fashion and to even CPG and manufacturing. I moved to Canada in 2017 for my MBA and I call Toronto my home now.
Nice, nice. Never been to Toronto, I must say. That's one I have to get to yet. I've been in Montreal and Vancouver, but never Toronto. But I've heard good things. So when next time I'm in Canada and I make it to Toronto, we'll have to meet up for a coffee or a beer or something.
Do drop by. We've got some really good collection of beverages owing to the diversity that the city brings in. I'm pretty sure any sort of beverage of choice can be arranged for.
Great. So AI and logistics, and what an interesting background, fashion and CPG and everything as well. Amazing. But AI and logistics, that's an interesting combo. AI, as you alluded to, we've had an interesting last almost 12 months now since ChatGPT was launched in November of last year. That's really driven AI to the forefront of a lot of conversations, including this one. But AI and logistics, how is the logistics industry embracing AI, or is it?
I think that's a very deep question, Tom. You're coming in hot for sure. The industry is embracing it definitely, but the industry in itself is very big and segmented. So you have water transportation or shipping, and then you have ground transportation, which then further gets segmented into trucking and rail. And we've seen that there's been uptake in the use of technology over the last 5 years or so, especially on the ground transportation side of things. There are some cutting edge technologies that are being utilized across the world. Telematics is one of the biggest ones.
Sure.
In fact, I was just talking to someone yesterday and they were telling me that perhaps 15 years ago, you had to print out a map and then hope for the best that you don't miss the route. Now, all of us have our phones. A lot of people use Google Maps, or the cars themselves have their own navigation systems built in. So there's a lot of AI that goes into just your dynamic route planning that you do through your GPS enabled apps that has started percolating down towards the trucking industry and the railroad industry. There's a lot of, I guess, asset heavy play in both of these industries, and that's where AI is doing its work in predictive maintenance, predictive analytics, prescriptive analytics. Where I do still think there is a fair bit of space left, or an area of opportunity, is perhaps in the maritime or the shipping domain, where I think that uptake has still been slow. And I do see some pretty exciting new players and new exciting technologies coming out in this domain. So while it hasn't really seen that sort of growth that its cousins perhaps in the surface transportation have seen, I'm very positive about how the next 3 or 4 years are going to pan out for the shipping industry. And I think there's definitely going to be almost a revolution of sorts in the use of technology, specifically AI in the maritime domain.
Interesting. And in what would be the use cases for AI in maritime shipping?
I guess the first one, and we hear a lot of this when we talk about the Amazons of the world, is last mile delivery. The shipping equivalent of that is probably the last nautical mile delivery. And I think that's the efficiency that the shippers would like to focus on, where they are able to get more precise operations, better vessel data using enhanced geographical location methods to exactly make sure what's the estimated time of arrival or estimated time of departure. There's also, I think, something to be done there in the domain of fine tuning the container routing and the rerouting, and the fuel consumption models that offer fuel savings guarantees. When you're talking about these vessels that are, you know, Panamax or Supramax sizes, which we're talking about, going beyond 40,000 or 50,000 or 100,000 tons,
Hmm.
how your containers are stacked on top of each other, where they're going, which will be the first container that'll get out at the destination port, whether or not that'll go on, train X or perhaps a truck Y that has come at the port. All of that basically talks to a lot of data being available based on where your container has originated, what is in it, how heavy is it, what's the weather pattern while I'm taking the ship through the journey, and then once I get down at the destination port, what's the final destination? Is it, perhaps if I dock my ship at Vancouver? Is it going to, somewhere in Calgary, or is it going to somewhere in Toronto? When you have those sort of variables and also as a result data that's available, I think there's a very strong case to be made for AI doing that sort of optimization rather than doing it traditionally, perhaps manually or semi-manually, either on Excel or tools that were created 5, 10 years ago. So I think that's probably going to be the one of the first important use cases where AI is going to differentiate itself.
Okay, and are these use cases primarily for gains in, let's say, efficiency or delivery time, or do you think there are possibility for sustainability wins here as well, or a combination?
There's definitely a combination of both. I guess just the scale that we are talking about, it's so massive that any small improvement is going to percolate down to different levels. Any small reduction in fuel is not only going to save the shipper a lot of money in terms of transportation costs, but then is also saving the world from a lot of carbon emission. And while efficiency is always going to be the forefront for the business case, I would imagine, at least in the beginning, through voyage planning and route forecasting, I think there's definitely an opportunity to reduce emissions and perhaps do something towards the sustainability of these modes of transportation. One of the things when I talk about, I'd say, last nautical mile delivery, I must mention I was in a port city recently, and I just saw 15 or 20 vessels, waiting at an inlet for probably more than 24 hours because they were waiting to be berthed
Hmm.
at the port and then unload. And it's true because I went on Monday, I saw them there, and I went on Tuesday and I saw the exact same vessels there. So there's energy being utilized to just keep those ships afloat in those inlets when they are not berthed. And there are now technologies out in the world which are providing you automated berth planning based on where your current ships are, where your next ships are, based on historical data as to how much time will it take to unload a ship. So not only I think we are saving a lot of fuel and energy that's being consumed due to perhaps not the most optimized operations, you're also saving a lot of time, people time that perhaps could be used for something else. There's also a correlation between, and I was reading something on the Great Resignation. There's a correlation between a company's emissions and the rate at which they lose employees. So a lot of these things are definitely interconnected, and through, I guess, enhanced planning, enhanced routing, you're looking to definitely achieve some sort of efficiency gains in terms of the energy that's been expended, and that again, as you're aware, that's a direct feeder into the emissions and the sustainability norms that governments are going to come up with.
Sure. And while some of these solutions are out there, as you say, what's the take up of them like? Is there isn't really a burning platform for shipping companies or harbors to deploy some of these technologies, is there?
I'd say not right now. It's not the same as perhaps what the iPhone was to the average phone user or what Spotify was to the average music connoisseur. It's getting there, but I think a very interesting situation that's happened in the last 3 years specifically, will probably necessitate the use of technology in the shipping space. And what I'm referring to is the pre-pandemic, the during the pandemic, and the post-pandemic situation that we see in the shipping and the freight world. We had sort of dwindling retail spend that resulted in reduced freight movement across the world, but the pandemic changed that on its head. There's a lot of retail spend, a lot of online e-com retail spend, and a lot of, I think we've all read about the ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal, or a bunch of ships just waiting to dock on the west coast of the US. And now we are facing a detox of sorts. Consumers are buying less, inflation's on the rise in certain countries, including here in Canada. There have been consecutive rate hikes that are definitely taking away the purchasing power from the average consumer. And as a result, the number of deliveries now required is going down, but the capacity still exists because the capacity was ramped up during the pandemic. I think as per the latest statistics, in the US, we stand at 4 trucks to 1 load ratio, which I think a year ago it was 2.5. So that's almost a 60% increase in the number of trucks to the number of loads you have. So when we are staring at perhaps an imbalance between capacity and the need for capacity, we obviously know that capacity will now be added at a slower pace, but companies would be looking to get the most out of their capacity now and going forward in the future. And I think that's where all the big players in the world, the Mercs, the OOCLs, the One Network Enterprise, or Ocean Network Enterprise of the world, all of them are going to definitely focus heavily on the use of technology, and that's going to be, I guess, pervasive across supply chains, operations, transportation, perhaps even storage of goods, warehouse distribution. And I think this sort of an anomalous economic behavior of almost having a little bit of a recession and then going into pandemic where we didn't know what's going to happen, having a really strong business perhaps during the tail end of the pandemic, and now that we're sort of out of it, we are again dealing with increased capacity, restrained supply, restrained demand. I think that's going to be the catalyst to bring these advanced technologies to the ports. And I guess the last piece I'd like to add is there are people that I know, there are companies that I know that have developed a lot of solutions, AI-based solutions in the port space. And we know for a fact that the ports are interested in that ecosystem of AI-based solutions. So it's only a matter of time till we actually see something happen.
And what kind of solutions are you referring to now, particularly with regard to ports?
I guess the first one that comes to mind is automatic berthing, where you use satellite data or data provided by ships to figure out whether, Tom's ship's going to be here at 2 p.m. or if it's Pranav's ship, who do I give the priority based on how big they are, how much load needs to be unloaded at the ports. There's this kind of technology uses the graphical information system, GPS coordinates, satellite data, which is actually funny enough publicly available, so it's not even that complicated to get the data. And then thirdly, if you do have data coming on from ships, we had the Internet of Things. We now use the Internet of Ships in the port domain or the shipping domain. Data from the ship itself can perhaps enrich your algorithm to provide you the best output. So that would be number one, I guess, for me. Number two would actually be probably in the domain of computer vision. That's, I guess, a personal favorite of mine because I do some work in that domain. But when you're talking about potentially, thousands of containers coming from a ship every day, the only way to remove those containers from that ship is latching onto those containers one by one, and then either putting them on the ground or on the truck or on the rail car. That is definitely a job that I think can perhaps be automated, especially considering that most of the new cameras are actually better than the human eye. So you are reducing a lot of error. And when you start reducing error in these kind of operations where you're talking about containers that are 25, 30 tons in weight, you're also doing something in terms of increasing or improving safety. So I think those two definitely would be the top three and the top two. And the third one is going to be on the voyage planning and route forecasting or route optimization, just to figure out, last nautical mile can be sorted, but you also need to sort out what's going on before that. What's your fuel consumption? going to look like, and what's the best speed going to look like in certain places in the oceans versus perhaps when the waters are not that cooperative. Do you reduce speed or do you just find a different route? So I think those three personally, I think would be something that will get traction. And I'd say they're also getting traction right now in the board space. Bonus ones, they'll always be outside the logistics domain when you're talking about pricing of these routes. But that's I guess a separate topic. If you want to delve into it, we can go into it.
Go for it. Why not? We're here.
So I guess when you're pricing your routes, your ship has a certain capacity. Tom, imagine you've bought probably 20% of the ship. Now, I'd probably not sell the remaining 80% at the same price that I sold you your first 20% of capacity, because now I'm working with less capacity. Earlier, I was sort of hard pressed to give you that 20% capacity because I had no one. But now, if I have more people coming in, what does that do to the capacity pricing? Do I slightly increase it for revenue maximization? Or, perhaps I'm not the only player in the market. There are some other shippers waiting to provide capacity to people who need it. Then how do I make my pricing more competitive for that route? So that's essentially what's meant by dynamic pricing. We also factor in stuff like weather data and fuel prices, and the Baltic price index already tells you what it looks like for the dry goods. So the more the variables we have, the better we can price a specific route based on if it's a revenue maximization play or if it's a volume maximization play. Probably I just want to, get your business as frequently as possible and then convert you on a contract. So, what is the strategy I'd deploy to get a person who generally gets spot quotes with me to now get them to do a contract with me rather than just a monthly spot quote. So that's something that can be done. We know it can be done, and we've done it in certain areas. I think these four, Tom, would be the biggest ones in the coming future for the shipping industry.
Okay, and what about some of the other transportation modalities? Are they also taking AI on board and changing their businesses that way?
Absolutely, 100%. That's definitely happening right now. The trucking companies are definitely, I'd say, the first movers when it comes to this kind of work. A lot of the large truck providers have already emulated some sort of a telematic solution, so they understand what's again fuel consumption like, if the driver's driving fine or they're driving aggressively. As you would imagine, there's also insurance companies backing this kind of initiative up, because that stands to reduce casualties in road accidents. It stands to improve the maintenance of your vehicles. The second piece, and I know a grocer in Canada did it, was just autonomous driving. For a fact, I know a grocer in Canada actually deployed a technology that basically made your run-of-the-mill CNC engine truck go automatic, and it drives without a driver inside it. So I think that's one of the other things that we're looking at. And more specifically, this is something I faced firsthand. I drove an electric car recently, and it was just unbelievably cheap to do the 700 kilometers or 350, 400 miles that I did. I can't even, it just changed my outlook towards electric vehicles. I think my next vehicle is probably going to be an electric vehicle, because instead of spending $100 on fuel, I just spend $10, $15 on electricity. So I think that's probably the next frontier in the logistics and transportation industry. Obviously, there are going to be some barriers in terms of battery capacity, the battery itself being pretty expensive. And then, there's only so much lithium in the world. So I'm pretty sure there's some lithium constraints as well as to how many vehicles we can actually create and make. And then finally, there's also the other question of do we actually have enough electricity to power not only these houses that are already being powered, but now also these cars and vehicles and trucks that might be EV. But that work is already on way. I'm pretty sure you saw a few months back. Well, I think it was Pepsi that received a bunch of trucks that are EV. So this the surface transportation is definitely paying more attention to it, and also because it is the more expensive mode of transportation as compared to shipping. Between Canada and US, 68% of the trade actually happened through road trucking or road surface transportation. So that the size of the pie is just too big to not make it more competitive, more efficient. And I think it's good for us as end consumers, and it's also good for us as inhabitants of this planet, that the transportation companies, the trucking and the railroad companies are paying attention towards what more can be done to make their operations efficient, and then concurrently also improve their emissions and their contributions toward the sustainability of the planet.
Sure. Just on the EV front, that's a topic that I know quite a bit about. So I've been driving an EV since 2018. Not the same one. I bought my first EV in 2018, and I bought another one, a replacement in 2022. So it's almost a year old now. The one I have, I bought it secondhand. It's a Kia Niro EV. They're fantastic. I have a solar panel on my roof, a 5 kilowatt solar array. So, it's even cheaper when you can power it from the sunlight on your roof, which is, even better again. To your point about lithium, it's one of the most abundant elements on the planet. There's no shortage of lithium. That's not going to be an issue. The other point you made about electrical distribution and generation, yeah, that will be an issue, but that's just a question of building out the grid. We've been doing that on grids globally for the last 150 years. So that'll just continue. There'll be an uptick in the requirement for electricity and distribution. The one place where there might be an issue is, and you touched on it, is the trucking and Pepsi with the Tesla semis that they took delivery of, really impressive vehicles. The issue there is that the megawatt charging standard, which has been agreed now for trucks, means that at truck stops where they have chargers, they'll need to have a very large connection to the grid, but B, they'll also need to have a large battery bank there, stationary storage, to back up the grid. Because if you have 3 or 4 trucks there trying to charge at the same time using a megawatt charging standard, it's unlikely there'll be a large enough pipe to power the grid there. So if they're trickle charging a stationary battery during the day when the trucks aren't plugged in, when the trucks do plug in, then they'll draw from the battery first, or just maybe draw 3/4 from the battery and 1/4 from the grid, that kind of thing. So there are solutions like that in place. So it's a fascinating space to keep an eye on, because the changes are happening fast and furious, and the outcome is going to be spectacular when you see the likes of the Tesla Semi or the Daimler electric vehicles as well, or the Volvo electric vehicles as well. When you see those big trucks alongside their internal combustion engine equivalents, there's no comparison. They're streets ahead, and they're far cheaper, to your point, because it's far cheaper to put electricity in. And the maintenance costs are about 50% of the maintenance costs of an internal combustion engine vehicle. So I think once the larger transportation vehicles are available in volume electric, those fleets will flip much faster than personal transportation, because the benefits are even more relevant, because people might not be as sensitive about changing their personal vehicle on, to your point, $100 for a trip, but fleet managers who are managing fleets of 20, 50, 100, 500 vehicles, the cost of filling those tanks adds up really, really quickly, and maintaining them.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is some, let's say, back of the envelope calculation that I was doing earlier last week, that if there's a transportation provider, or let's say a large retail company that drives 35,000, 30,000 trucks in their fleet, which they do, but if you were to reduce the fuel consumption by 5 minutes, which basically translates to, I think, around 50 milliliters of fuel or something like that, yearly you're looking at almost $250,000 less spent in fuel. And we can do the math and figure out how much of less carbon dioxide emitted that would be. So I think that's already started through telematics. I think dynamic routing is going to be the next one, where you actually embed in real-time data, real-time fuel consumption, real-time driving behaviors to figure out what's the best route to take. And once you're starting to reduce emissions there, I think you're already plugging away. That, I think, is the short-term solution to the problem at hand. And the long-term solution is obviously moving to more sustainable modes of transportation, and EV is going to be that one.
Sure. You mentioned early on, Pranav, that one of the technologies that's for you really interesting is computer vision, and we haven't kind of dug into that. So, talk to me a little bit about that and the effects that's having on the logistics industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is out in the public domain, but Deloitte actually worked with a port out west in British Columbia to implement some of the computer vision technologies that we had developed. And, initially the computer vision technology was just supposed to be sort of a single source of truth to figure out whether a container had been inspected upon or not. But we placed in a bunch of cameras in the facility, and we started capturing data which eventually led us to insights that weren't initially what we were looking for, but they were just so powerful. So we had now information on when a particular container came in and how long was it in the yard and when did it leave. And if, let's say, Tom, you were supposed to pick up your container on Monday, 12 p.m., and you didn't show up till Tuesday, 6 p.m., then guess what? I've got video evidence of your container just being that and your guy taking it away on Tuesday, 6 p.m. So now I can actually provide you video based billing or invoicing. That's one of them. The second one is we were able to now find out which are the days when you see maximum traffic in the yard. So let's say it's on Tuesday, and specifically on Tuesday around 3 p.m. for whatever reason. Now I can plan my workforce and my material handling equipment around it. So now I need to ensure that I have max workforce availability during that time, and that they'll have no maintenance scheduled during the time as well to service the peak hours. We were also able to get data around, where is a specific container in the yard. Yeah, instead of going around and trying to figure out where my container is, you can actually get pinpointed location. While yard management solutions do that, they do that for larger yards, and the moment you have smaller yards, the ROI from yard management solution sort of dwindles down and goes away. And that's when computer vision, which has just got an unbelievable number of applications, both from a logistics point of view, distribution point of view, and also manufacturing point of view. That's when computer vision comes along. I guess it's an acceptable fact that computers or cameras are perhaps better than the human eye, because the cameras don't get tired and the algorithms don't really make mistakes. So we've actually seen almost 99.99% accuracy in detecting these containers. The loss of accuracy is either because the driver drove too fast or because the container numbers were rubbed off. So the algorithm itself is pretty strong, and there are a lot of algorithms like that available out in public domain for public consumption. We in fact, I guess our starting point was something like that, and then we refined it further and further to the operations to make sure that that detection is being done. On the flip side, so what I explained to you is basically what we call at Deloitte outside of the four walls, and inside of the four walls, we have another sort of system that'll perhaps do a dimensional analysis to tell you how many boxes can go into this truck and whether or not you're placing the boxes in the right sort of sequence, depending on where they're getting out or getting down on. Whether a certain box that's being shipped or that's being received is damaged or not. And if it is, then you're taking the picture right away that can be shared with the vendor or the supplier that, hey, you know what? We probably have to send this back because it was damaged. We are also sort of figuring out the applicability to tracking inside large facilities. It could be tracking of either the items that are in a warehouse, or tracking of pallets that are going around in your whole supply chain by providing them unique identifiers. There's lane assignment both inside and outside a warehouse. If I know that a forklift operator is operating in a specific lane, I just tell the other forklift driver to go from somewhere else, just bypassing that lane. And the same concepts now applicable in large rail yards or shipping yards or trucking yards, where you can let trucks know whether to come in through lane one or lane two or lane three. So I think those are some of the biggest ones. There's also, as part of that, traffic detection is one of those. So I know Deloitte Australia does some work in terms of traffic detection where you can actually detect if there's been an accident. Before someone dials 911, the cameras actually start telling you that the flow is getting constrained, and the cameras would automatically notify the local authorities of a probable incident. And in these kind of cases, seconds matter, right? So instead of someone actually waiting, sitting, getting down and seeing how severe the situation is, your cameras just already tell you that, hey, there's been some incident, vehicles are getting clogged up. So now I'll do two things. I notify the authorities, and also the vehicles that are getting clogged up behind, I'll sort of create a routing system that's just taking them away from that scene of accident so that I don't impede the traffic that's behind. So that's work that has been done in this domain. I know a lot of rail companies have started mounting cameras on the underside of their trains to check for track health. If there have been cracks on the rail tracks, or if there's vegetation that's growing on certain rail tracks, you can now record all of that information, relay it back to your maintenance group, and they'll do the needful. That computer vision piece is growing quite a bit, and just with the billions of computer vision enabled devices that we have around ourselves, which is basically camera, and so much of it goes unanalyzed or unutilized. So I think there's definitely a big uptake for that kind of those kind of solutions in the future, and it's already in our homes. A lot of us have these motion detecting or face detection based doorbells, or motion detecting based home cameras for babies or pets or whatnot. So computer vision is definitely being democratized. It was already in the palm of our hands when we started unlocking our phones using the phone camera. That was, I guess, the infancy and probably even one of the best examples of what computer vision is capable of. Back home in India, where I'm originally from, some airports have started using cameras to identify passengers to actually make the flow through of passengers much quicker.
Hmm.
I know in North America we do have some concerns around privacy and that kind of work. So we'll probably see something like that come up, perhaps in the future, not right now. This morning I was reading that digital passport has been made a reality in Finland. So that again is based on computer vision, because you scan your digital passport and someone scans your face. All of this is being done to essentially improve the flow of passengers through the airport. So I could go on and on about that, but I think these are the most important applications that we see today as they relate to the supply chain.
Cool. And where to next? What's coming down the line, do you think? What's kind of the future of AI and technology in supply chain?
I think I'm no expert in this, but it has to be Gen AI. I was growing up and I saw the internet grow with me, and it went from something that was just used to send emails or maybe just download some music or watch something, to just this insane encyclopedia of information that is highly democratized. I still remember as a kid, I really wanted my parents to buy me a Britannica encyclopedia. Now you don't need it. You just need the internet. You need a device that you can access the internet with. And I think what the internet did to that generation, that's what Gen AI is going to this generation, because it's taken artificial intelligence to a really different level, when it's truly now replacing human intelligence. There are things that I've done with Chat GPT that I know I would have probably taken about 2 hours to do. So when you have that sort of brain power, artificial brain power being embedded into solutions, life can become a lot more easier. I know there's obviously, people who are much more well versed in this area and smarter than me. They have commented about what implications it might have more on the negative side, both AI and Gen AI. But I'd like to focus on the positive more, because that's where I see the future going. And I think we'll be just becoming way more efficient, way more cognizant of what's going around us. Just imagine on a small screen, or maybe even somewhere in your house, a small device that every time you do anything, it tells you what's the impact you're having on the climate. Right? Let's say if you left the lights on, or let's say if you left the TV on, or the water on. That's something that Gen AI could play a huge part in. I guess just retaining the workforce when you move around in different industries or jobs, or you're doing your next role, a lot of this work can actually be automated, and then this can almost be like, I don't know if you remember that paperclip kind of assistant that used to be there on Microsoft Word, and it used to
Clippy.
tell you, yeah, Clippy. I think Gen AI is the next Clippy. It's just much, much more powerful and smarter. And my advice, I guess, to everyone listening would be to start exploring Gen AI. It is saying something when it can code for you, or pretty much deliver insights for you. So now, people like you and me, Tom, we don't really have to be ace coders as long as we know the basics of it. Gen AI is going to give you, ChatGPT is going to give you a code. So I think that is the next frontier. And though I definitely see the world has changed, right? 12 months ago, no Gen AI, to 12 months later when you have Gen AI, everybody's excited about it, rightly so. I also feel it's slightly different than the fanfare that we had around blockchain or crypto. I think this is different, and it's more proven, and it's got more use cases in our day-to-day life than those other two technologies. So definitely here to stay, and definitely a big opportunity.
Nice. Nice, nice. Pranav, we're coming towards the end of the podcast now. Is there any question I haven't asked that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to think about?
Yeah, I guess, Tom, thanks for giving me that opportunity. I think it's the culmination of all of these technologies, the culmination of AI, Gen AI. I just briefly touched upon blockchain. It all goes down to supply chain visibility and supply chain trust. We've conducted, Deloitte has conducted some surveys where we found that a consumer is willing to pay more if they know that whatever they're buying, be it goods or services, have been sourced sustainably. And I think once we start seeing that in every product that we buy, I have a book lying in front of me. If someone could tell me how much emissions did this cost to the environment, perhaps I might just buy ebooks right after that. So, or maybe if someone told me that this was made entirely out of recycled paper, I'd probably pay $1 more than what I did for it. So I think supply chain visibility is something that's going to democratize supply chain further than what it has been after it was thrown in the spotlight during the pandemic. And that in turn, I think both sustainability and supply chain are very, very closely related, as is manufacturing. But the sustainability will go forward only when the final consumer understands its value and puts a price on it. Because the moment your consumers start asking for sustainable goods, I wonder if there'll be a market for goods that were built using or created using unsustainable practices. So I think all of these technologies, they're supposed to serve one common purpose, which is to improve the conditions for humanity, and then in turn also improve the conditions for the planet that we live in.
Nice, nice, nice. Pranav, that's been really interesting. If people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we talked about in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
Absolutely. I can be reached on my LinkedIn. So just Pranav Bhardwaj, the one that at work that works at Deloitte. I think we've got a couple of other ones as well. So you got to find the one who works at Deloitte. And then I'll share some links with you, Tom, that you can embed. And that's where the listeners and the viewers can read some of the studies that I referenced.
Perfect, perfect, fantastic. Great, Pranav, that's been really, really interesting. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Tom, thank you very much for inviting. It was a pleasure.